Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Take Back My Brain podcast. I am your host, Laurie Hammer, and today I have with me Dr. Christina Castagnini, and I'm so excited to have her here today because it's a conversation that really needs to be had, and we as women really don't talk about it enough. So it's the topic of eating disorders. And so I have my own personal story with an eating disorder. We're going to hear about Dr. Christina's personal story and how she works with those who have eating disorder struggles. And then we can kind of marry that with what I do to help people as well with their eating and body image and those types of things. So Dr. Christina, thank you so much for joining this conversation today. I know this is going to be a blessing to our audience. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. And I'm so glad you're having this conversation because I think we need to have the conversation. I don't think it's talked about enough. So thank you.
No, absolutely not. I would love to hear your story and how you got to this place of helping people with body image and eating disorder and food, food relationships and all those kind of things.
Yeah. So, I think not that atypical. I hate to kind of perpetuate the myth of like the teenage, Caucasian female that like started having the eating disorder stuff at puberty, because that is like the unfortunate myth out there that only teenage females have
Right.
eating disorders. But that's kind of where it starts. Or at least when I started engaging in the behaviors. I had body image issues from a very young age. I was born with birth defects, and so from a very young age, I felt like my body, or at least I was given messages that something was wrong with my body. So I know that's a lot of the start. I was born in Northern California, so I was at UCSF as a young child getting photographed and having like doctors in white coats
Yeah.
um, taking pictures of me. So I felt very self-conscious about my body. And like I said, just feeling like something's wrong with me. I always got comments from other people like, were you burned? What's wrong with you? And so
Mhm.
I never felt comfortable wearing swimsuits, tank tops. Always wished I could. I always saw my friends wearing these cute little dresses and going, I can't do that. So let's fast forward to puberty. So of course, hormones kick in and feeling kind of out of control with your body as it is, right?
Right, right.
Like, gosh, what's happening? But I also felt really self-conscious because my aunt asked me to be in her wedding, and we have a large Italian family, and she wanted a dress that was going to show off the part of my body that had, you know, my shoulder, which was where my birth defect was. And I was just imagining hundreds of eyeballs on me at the age of 11 going,
Sure.
no,
But right.
this isn't happening. But I had no choice in the dress. Um, so I was in sixth grade, and there was a doctor up where I lived who was doing, I was the first person to be part of this experimental surgery to do shoulder reconstruction. So I think this was all just a perfect storm of, for me, hell.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
moved from one city to another. It was
Mm.
culture shock for me. I lost all my friends. Um, I was going to be in this wedding. Puberty was hitting. I just felt so out of control with like my life.
Craziness. Yes.
I was taken out of like 6 months of sixth grade to do these two surgeries. And I just think, what could I control, right?
Right. Right.
I'm home without my peers, and I just remember looking at a Slim Fast commercial and going, you know, let me try that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I remember distinctly taking like allowance money and going down to the store and getting Slim Fast. And that was like
Oh,
the
interesting.
first
Mm-hmm.
thing I did. And I remember getting compliments like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You look so great.
Just feeding that. Yeah.
And I think that's a typical story I hear from people. It's like that
Yeah.
first time you try something and that hit of like, it's like, it's, I know the hit of dopamine, right? The pleasure,
Oh,
the
yeah.
reinforcement of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something right, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you felt like you were doing so many things wrong or things were so wrong around you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
similar story to you was kind of around the same age, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There was a lot of family upheaval, and my mom was sick all the time, and she was yo-yo dieting, and she was doing this, a lot of depression, anxiety, just things were out of
Mm-hmm.
control. So family dynamic was a challenge, and I just really felt like I didn't have any control over everything. And I saw a
Mm-hmm.
Karen Carpenter movie,
Yeah.
and I thought, Well, that won't happen to me, what happened to Karen Carpenter. But if I just binged and purged, like if I just, threw up everything that I ate, then, I'd lose a few pounds and then I would look better and I would, draw attention to the guy that I liked, or, maybe my mom would be pleased with me, or, so many different avenues. At that age, you just don't know how to filter through any of that. And then you end up in this deep spiral. So what happened to you, after you started this Slim Fast? What was next?
Well, it's interesting you say like what you get exposed to, right? So I'm like, I was always involved with sports and things, right? So I was like, obviously, I was really hungry. It wasn't working. And I wanted to eat. And part of our culture too, I'm Italian, right? Like food's a big thing.
A
And
big thing, yes.
yeah, it's huge. And I was also in gymnastics. And I remember reading a book about girls who were in gymnastics. And I don't know why this book was even allowed to be written, honestly, but I remember the girl was talking about how her coach was getting on her to lose weight, and
Yep.
she described eating and throwing up to stay within the weight. And I'm like, there's an idea. And so I was like, I'll do that too. And so I kind of went through these stages of like doing the slim fast dieting, kind of restricting. And then when I
Yep.
wanted to eat, I was like, well, let me eat and then throw it up. So I would have these different stages
Yeah.
throughout like all of my teenage years. And I'd try fasting, I try liquid diets. I didn't realize I was using exercise as a purging technique. I just thought purging was throwing up.
Right. Get it.
But I was doing all sorts of things, and I just thought I was failing at dieting, to be honest with you. I didn't really realize anything was disordered. I just thought I got to figure this out. Like I got to find the next best diet. I tried like the zone diet, this diet. I tried everything, right? I tried like diet fuel from GNC. I mean, I tried so many things, right? I was just
Yep.
like a
Yep.
sponge, and I had no idea what path I was on. I remember in college, led up into college, I was taking laxatives. I remember getting to like this point where I even wrote a check for laxatives. Like I was so desperate to try anything because I thought, I'm not doing this right. Something's wrong.
I
It's me that's
understand.
the failure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish there would have been more talk about eating disorders. I wish there would have been more information back then. There was just nothing. Like to your point, all I knew about was like after school specials and Karen Carpenter died of a heart attack.
Right.
That's
Right.
it.
That was it. I know you watch the older women around you and they're all trying the Slim Fast. They're all trying, the Weight Watchers and the top stuff. And you're like, okay, so, and well-meaning and yet so destructive comments, like, oh, if you just lose a few more pounds, maybe you get another date, or if you did this or if you did that, or look at so and so, or their waist is so tiny. How come yours isn't so tiny? Things that you don't really think about. We're
Yeah.
just traumatic events. What can we control? We can control our food, right? And so, I think as we try to hide those things, because deep down inside of us, we know that it's not serving ourselves and we feel guilty. We feel ashamed. We feel all these things. I know every time I binged and purged, I'm like, never am I going to do this again. And then 6 hours later, I was back to binging and purging again because it was an addiction. It was like, how do I feel comfortable about who I am and how do I function in life? It was a coping mechanism. Would you say that that's typical? It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
your coping mechanism with life.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I mean, I knew it was consuming my life. I mean, at one point it was like everything. Like I had to maintain rituals, routines, like fit in my exercise. I had to be a certain amount of minutes per day. It had to be a certain type of exercise. If I didn't do it, I would skip sleep just to get it
Yep.
in. Like it was like, oh, gosh, yeah, the so many things that I missed out on life, or things that I like made excuses for to fit in all these things. I didn't realize
Yeah.
like that was all eating disorder stuff. I look back now going, oh my gosh, like how on
And how
earth
are
did
we
I not
still
realize
alive?
this? No, for real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the master cleanse was this big thing. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Like feeling
Been there,
so
done that.
sick and like feeling like nauseous and like ugh. I felt awful, but I was like, well, all the celebrities are doing this.
Right.
Like they was on all the Shape magazines, and I know like magazines. I'm dating myself now, but we didn't have the like internet, right?
Right.
But it was
Right.
in all of these magazines, and I would follow like I would read those like they were the Bible. Like, what are all the celebrities doing? Because they would go into detail, like, what are they doing? What exercises? What are they eating? Kind of like on the internet now, like, what do I eat in a day? Right.
Right.
And I'd be like, oh, well, that's what they're doing. That's what they put their weights and their heights, right? I'd be like, oh, well,
Hmm.
if I'm that height and that's what they weigh, what am I doing wrong?
Right. Right.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
It's just so messed up. So messed up. And
Mhm.
I think when you started, out telling us what was going on or how you got to where you were saying, you hate to start, maybe not hate to start, but you don't want to be the stereotypical, like it just starts, that teenage white girl that all of a sudden develops this eating disorder. And I think we need to expand that conversation to, I know I see women in my office that they may have been fine in their teen years and they hit their 20s or their 30s,
Mhm.
even 40s, and now their body image is so distorted and their eating patterns are so destructive. Could you speak to some of that as to what you're seeing and how you're helping those types of people?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I think I'm actually seeing a lot of women who are middle aged or going through menopause.
Hmm.
Again, the body's changing, shifting, and there's a lot now out in the media about like you've been menopause belly, you've got to change this, and here's the diet. And there's a lot of push for like women to like
Yeah.
do something against what biology's doing naturally. Like they're doing
Hmm.
something wrong if their body's actually just naturally going through a change, right? I think that's a big push. And I, um, there's a lot of education now about like the harms of the internet. I think there's so much noise. There's so much that people are bombarded with now with the filtered apps and not seeing real pictures, not knowing what's real and not knowing what's not. So people are bombarded with like images of
Hmm.
unrealistic bodies and shapes
Right.
and sizes and like thinking everyone looks perfect, so when they look in the mirror they're like, well, I don't look like that. It's like nobody looks like that because you don't know what even your friends look like because they're altering themselves, right? So there's
Right.
all this pressure,
Yep.
and then all these influencers now that are so noisy, like this is what I eat in a day, and oh, look what I do, and I look in a bikini, but they're almost like wolves in sheep's clothing. I think, I don't know what you think, but
Hmm.
they're touting like, oh, I can help you with your emotional eating, I can help you make peace with food, I did too, so follow what I do. But it's very toxic diet culture messaging
Yes.
instead of
Yes.
like the what you and
Yeah.
I are talking about, which is actually not doing disordered stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I know I mean, and I've been on this journey for so long and, I don't have an eating disorder anymore. And I feel like I have a good relationship with food and I eat to nourish and I'm not, but, transitioning, I turned 50 this year, right? And so
Mhm.
hormones are shifting, body is shifting, and I catch myself looking in the mirror. I'm like, what is this arm flab stuff? And it bothers me. And I
Mhm.
have to talk to myself and say, it's kind of part of the process here. Can you do something about that? Sure. I can exercise differently. I can do some different things, and it's still part of the process, right? I'm still going to get crow's feet. I'm still going to
Mhm.
get, my body is aging. I'm turning 50. And I think it's hard to allow ourselves to embrace that change because we're told to stay youthful as long as you can. But yes, which is a mindset, right? I don't feel like I'm 50. I guess I don't know what 50 is supposed to feel like, but I know I physically feel better than I did when I was 30 because I'm definitely healthier than I did when I was 30, but I certainly don't look as firm as I did when I was 30, right? And to be able to accept that and just to know that that's part of what's going to happen, in this life, and just to stay as healthy and strong as we possibly can. And,
Mhm.
as our hormones are shifting, our brain is shifting. And I don't know what you're seeing, but I just see a lot of burnt out women whose brains are fried and they can't possibly wrap their brain around any more change that happens to their body because it's something they have to look at every single day in the year, every single day, right? And,
Mhm.
something we can still focus on and change because so much around us seems out of control still.
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of pressure. You brought up the age thing too. For women,
Hmm.
this toxic diet culture thing, you have more value, you have more worth if you have, the quote unquote ideal body that we get bombarded with. But also right? You're not supposed to age. If you're doing something wrong, if you look, you don't look youthful all the time, right?
Right.
Yeah, think about it, right? The $72 billion diet and beauty industry, they're making a profit. How are they making a profit? It's by all of us feeling bad about ourselves, feeling like, well, we can attain this because other people look like this. So if you're not, you're doing something wrong, like you're
Right.
failing.
Right.
Well, here's a solution here. Buy all this stuff, do all this stuff, right? There's
Uh-huh.
this pressure, right? Because how many times have you heard like, oh, she let herself go. Oh, she's
Uh-huh.
not doing enough, right?
Yep.
It's like this pressure of like, oh, and the other message is like, oh, they look so great. They don't look their age. Like,
Right. Right.
okay,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is that age supposed to look like? Because all of us are so different. Like I'm
Hmm.
going to look different at 50 than you look at 50 because you're a totally different person. Or,
Right.
different than my mother-in-law looked at 50. One, it's a whole different era. It's a whole different style. It's a whole different, however
Right.
you want to put it. We're just all going to look different. And I hate to see women my age get caught up in, okay, now I really got to start working out again and trying to build up all the muscle because we do need muscle. We do need muscle. We do need to, take care of our bodies and to keep moving and to do all those things. And yet I feel like it's leading some into some very disordered eating and disordered body image things going
Hmm.
on at the moment. And then you have the other spectrum where it's like, oh, you can do whatever you want. And, fat's the new thin. And, and then it's, kind of shaming the people who are staying thin. And why don't you just, there's just so much
There's
that's
so
just
much.
mixed and messed up, Christina.
It'd be nice if we could just embrace that everybody is different and
Yeah.
there's, like you can look at somebody and know if they're physically healthy or not. You
Mm-hmm.
can't look at somebody and know if they have an eating disorder or not.
Yep.
Um, and just to your point, like embracing exercise for a whole different purpose than like compensating for the food you eat or the purpose of exercise is not weight loss. Okay.
Oh,
Let's just like go there for a second. Like to your point, it's to just, we're mobile beings, right? So
mm-hmm.
to just maintain a level of functional fitness in our lives, like carrying groceries into the, from your
Right.
car to the house, or like,
I want to stay strong.
yeah, like preventing osteoporosis so that, you don't fall when you're older, because falls are a huge risk for like,
Yeah.
problems when you're older, or, just some maintaining some muscle mass. So to, again, your point, you can get up and down when you're older, or like moving your joints so you have some flexibility and mobility, because those are issues that if you don't kind of just do a little bit of movement, they can become problematic when you're older.
Right.
um it's not to, and this, you don't have to do this crazy amount of exercise. um People say, oh gosh, I have to do all this stuff, but I don't know about you. When I had my eating disorder, I was like, walking doesn't count, but
Right. Like, oh, I just walk. I don't really exercise. I just walk. I'm like, I walk. I walk 4 miles a day with my dogs because they're very hyper and they need that. Um, and then, you work out a few other days a week and it's good. And I feel really good about that. When I stopped going to the gym, I felt this freedom just
mm-hmm.
like lift off my shoulders. I'm like, I don't even like going there. I don't like working out with other people. I don't like the noise. I want to be by myself and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and finding something that's not this quote unquote whatever, like exercise. Like you said, it means people think like, oh, if I don't go to the gym, I'm not exercising.
Right.
But there's so many different forms of movement.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think it's that toxic mentality of like tying exercise and food. It's that verbiage of like exercise more, eat less. It's like, let's challenge that a little bit. Like, what is that about?
Right. Right. Yeah,
I'm so eating disordered.
it is. It is. So how do we start overcoming that? Like, what do you suggest or what do you teach?
Well, I mean, you even having this podcast, right? Let's talk
Right.
about it. I think people don't even second guess it. It's almost like, a truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
A belief
Yeah.
that's like gravity or something. It's like, well, yeah, of course. I think there's a lot of work being done. People are challenging the BMI, and I think most
Mm-hmm.
people nowadays like do believe it's BS, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's still used.
Still
I don't know
used,
why.
widely used. Yep.
If we can get rid of things like that, I think it would help immensely. But also, educating, I think it's just a lot of education, educating people that like, there's other countries who are so far ahead of us where they have little disclaimers on the pictures that say this is an altered photo.
Yep.
This is not real. I mean, that would be great. Then people would at least have, I don't know if it would help a lot, but it would at least give some awareness like, okay, this person actually doesn't look like this. It would just do something.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there is no ideal body. There is no ideal woman. There is no ideal man because everybody is so different, So to say that there's an ideal BMI or an ideal weight or this or that,
Mhm.
is there, where do you feel healthiest? And where do you say I don't want to get caught up in lab numbers and stuff, but what does your testing say? If you go get some testing, are your numbers in a good range for your age and your level? I'm always testing, women's hormones or stuff and like, okay, this is why you feel bad. And sometimes you just need to have some testing done and
Mhm.
say, you're not being lazy. Cause I have a lot of women that come, they're like, I have no energy. I am failing at this. And this is the way that I look and I don't like it. And, my brain feels like this, and I just feel like I'm losing my mind and I'm not trying hard enough and I'm failing, and you have to sit down and say, you're not failing. Look, what else are you accomplishing in your life? Like, look at your life. You've raised your children. You are a wife. You keep your home. You have a job full time. Where are you lazy in all of this? Right. So your physical health is suffering. So let's figure out why. Right.
Mhm.
And I run a lot of hormone testing. It's called Dutch testing. And we test, all sorts of different things. And, their cortisol levels are basically
Mhm.
nothing. And I show it to them. I can't tell you how many women have just cried in my office and saying, that's why I can't exercise. Like, yeah, you have nothing left to give.
Mhm.
Like, this is why you're so tired. And it's actually empowering. So, sometimes we just need that validation. Like, I have given so much because I think we have the I am not enough
Mhm.
culture going on with women right now because we're trying hard to prove ourselves, to compete, to do all these things when, we're created for more rest than
Yeah.
we've ever than we've allowed ourselves to have. As women, we've not allowed ourselves to recover from pregnancy.
Yeah.
How you just get right back in there. We've not allowed ourselves to recover from, the death of a parent or taking care of parents. I
Mhm.
think we're transitioning into different stages of life and we do have to do things differently than men do. We do have to view the world a little bit differently. We do have to take on tasks differently. And so finding a practitioner like yourself or myself that can, really dive into those things for you, and speaking to the audience is that you need somebody that can come alongside of you and say, okay, you've done such amazing things in this area. This area is a struggle. Let's figure out why.
Mhm.
Let's start nourishing you, whether it's in your mind, whether it's your body, whether it's in your spirit. Most of the time, it's all three, right?
Mhm.
There's just so many issues going on out there. Do you think that somebody can really recover from an eating disorder once they have one? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question because it's such a myth out there.
Mhm.
And yes, of course. The myth is that once you have one,
Right.
you always kind of have one, right?
Right.
And that's a big reason why I started my podcast, actually, because I wanted to break all the myths. And so a lot of the reason why I do my work too is I wanted to say, listen, I didn't have that when I was going through treatment. Someone that had been there, done that, had experienced anything. I didn't have anybody saying, of course you can get over this, right? Like, of course you can have a
Exactly.
life free of this. I wish I would have because it would have
Mhm.
helped. Because I think it's very powerful what you tell yourself. So if you have that belief, like I'm always going to kind of have this,
Mhm.
that's what it's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People
Oh.
stop treatment early. They're like, well, I've come far enough. But if
Mhm.
you really believe and know and like have somebody in your life, like whether it's a therapist or like you hear something on a podcast or you hear enough
Yeah.
people around you say like, no, actually I'm free of this. I was struggling with this, but you see it and like, wow, they really are living a life without it.
Yeah.
You have that hope. You're like, wait, I can do that too.
Yep. Yep.
So I think a lot of times we just need to have the voices. We need to have people coming out saying like, no, I've recovered from this fully
Mhm.
so that
Yep.
other people can get there.
And know that there's freedom there. I think freedom is
Mhm.
such the key. And when you're in an eating disorder, most people have got anxiety and depression or OCD. They're overwhelmed with life. They can't sleep. They're afraid of so many different things. And we forget because you can't talk away a nutrient deficiency, right? And so talk therapy and counseling and all those things is totally a part of the piece. But if your brain is deficient, it's so much harder you can't walk through all those things because your brain can't possibly process it. And so I'm not a counselor. What I do is rebuild the brain so that you can go to somebody, like yourself and talk through these things and work through these things and come out on the other side. Because if you're super deficient in serotonin, your obsessive compulsive thoughts, your depression, your anxiety is really hard to overcome. But when you boost that serotonin with specific nutrients, when you boost your GABA, when those neurotransmitters going on in your brain, then things light up. You're like, you have a whole new world. You're like, I didn't know I was so depleted. And like, I have women that sit in my office and they walk out and they're like, I feel better than when I walked in. And it was because I gave them nourishment to their brain. It's amazing. And then they go to their counselors and their psychotherapists and, therapists, and they make progress.
Yeah.
And then you can overcome things, and then life doesn't feel as stressful. It's nourishing, and letting go. There's just nourishing and letting go, and let God do what God was, designed your body to do and to heal and to move through all these things. We're not meant to be stuck.
No. And I love that you said that too, because I don't think they get so used to existing in a world where they're
Yes.
so lacking nutrition and energy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really realize what it feels like when they finally get enough nutrition and enough energy. It's like the light bulb goes off. And I've seen it in so many patients. It's like they're a whole different person, and we can really work through some things and work through the cognitive distortions and figure out like, okay, how do you get past the eating disorder? But until that happens, I mean, I show people MRIs of like someone who has anorexia nervosa, the brain is atrophied.
Right.
But someone who's restored and like they've had nutrition and they've been eating, like their brain goes back. It's like amazing. I love it. Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
all of a sudden tingles and comes alive.
Like, look, your brain can get restored. Like, and this is like, how do you even function if like it's so depleted?
Yeah.
I can't do therapy with people because this is like, it's not computing. It's not functioning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know there's going to be a lot of questions out there as people are listening. Like, so how do I know if I have an eating disorder or if somebody in my family has an eating disorder? So some of the things that you and I are talking about are they're clicking, they're ringing some bells for people. Like, how do you help people to identify, say they're calling for their child or themselves or a neighbor or whatever it might be?
So one question I asked like somebody is like, how much of your day is spent thinking about food, your body, exercise, like what you want to eat, didn't eat, like just in general, like how much for your just brain, your thoughts. And if people say like oh my God, like all day, 80-90%, like that's a clue just for yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's a lot. But that's just, and I don't know your experience, but like for me, it was
that's
like
that's a lot of energy on one thing.
Yeah. But I couldn't even imagine like going like an hour. I mean, I don't even like a minute without some kind of thought popping through my head. Right.
Yep.
So that's one clue. If you yourself or you're noticing somebody is not going on to social events, they're skipping out, they're starting to isolate more. That's something. Or if they are at events and they're making excuses for not eating, like, oh, I already ate, or I'm not hungry, or I don't feel well, or I'm going to eat later. That's something too. Or if you're noticing you're making those excuses or not wanting to go to events because maybe you're like, oh, they're not going to have food I can eat, or I'm scared to eat that, or you don't want to eat in front of people. You're afraid they're going to make comments about what you're eating, anything like that. That's a big clue. Also, if you're, like I had mentioned before, like you have to work out every day, because if you don't, your mood's going to be altered. You're going to feel guilty. Like working out is dependent on like what you eat for the day. So like you earn your food by working out, or if you don't work out, like you don't allow yourself to eat later on. That's a big clue too. Or if you put the gym or exercising above everything else, like class, work, socializing, sleep, huge red flag. If you are weighing yourself several times a day and that number on the scale determines your mood, your self-worth, also what you eat or don't eat during the day, that's a huge clue.
Yep.
That's like a level, that's one form of body checking, but body checking can be other things like looking in every reflective mirror, pulling your shirt up and looking at your belly, um, comparing yourself to other people's bodies when you walk into a
Mhm.
room, like wanting to be the smallest. And if you're not, you like kind of spiral down,
Yep.
shifting in your chair when you're wearing clothes, like constantly worried about like how you look, worried that like, if you sit this certain way, then you're gonna not look as good, or constantly
Right.
just hyper vigilant about your appearance like that. Trying to think what else. If you notice somebody when they're eating, they're just kind of playing with their food, they're cutting it up in little pieces and they're kind of moving it
Mhm.
around, but they're not really eating, or you're doing that, that's a big clue too. So
Yeah.
just some things to look out for.
Right. So what do you do when you are like identifying those things? You're like, okay, either I have this or somebody else that I know has this. How would you approach them? Because that's a very delicate area. So what do they do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know your experience, but with mine, it was the most shameful,
Yep.
embarrassing thing in the world. And nobody wants to talk about it. It's like clam up, like get defensive, lie at all
Yeah.
costs, right? Yeah, if you kind of approach somebody with this, I think they're gonna lie or like shut
I
down.
did. Like,
Yeah.
not a problem.
What are you
I'm
talking about?
fine.
I'm fine. I would just say, hey, you know what? I've noticed you kind of been not coming to things, or you're isolating,
Mhm.
or I've noticed you kind of not been yourself lately. If you want to talk, let me know. Or, if any, you can seem kind of stressed lately,
Mhm.
if you want to talk about anything, let me just kind of like approaching them with like more of, I'm here for you if you need anything.
Right.
Um, Instead of like going for the dagger. And another thing with people, sometimes they think they're being helpful, but they're like, they will approach somebody and be like, I'm just concerned about your health. I love you. I just,
Mhm.
if why don't you just eat, or why don't you just stop eating, or why don't you try this diet, or this worked for me. It's like, oh my gosh, that will just set someone on a
Yeah.
spiral, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I know, like, I remember when I was in high school, I think I was a sophomore, and my mom caught me binging and purging.
Mm.
And, she was so mad at me, so mad at me. So don't be mad at people. And,
Mm-hmm.
she laid on the couch and was depressed for a couple days because I had an eating disorder. And she's like, how could you do this to me? How could you do
Oh.
this to me? And to make sure that you're not putting the blame back on the person who is struggling, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gee, I'd like to be an alcoholic today. Or, gee, I think I'll binge and purge all day. I mean, that's never the goal. The goal is you wake up, you're like, okay, today I'm not going to do those things. And then they happen, right? You learn these really bad coping mechanisms, and the brain is so depleted and they're so hurt and disgusted with themselves on the inside. And they look in the mirror and they don't see who you see, right? They don't hear who you hear. They don't look at their life and they see this amazing person, that you see in them. So be very, very delicate and not use anything shameful, because they're not doing this to you. They're not trying to intentionally destroy themselves while they are, but that's not the intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I ended up in the ER and I was having seizures because I was taking so many laxatives and binging and
Mm-hmm.
purging so much, like I could have died, but it didn't click in my brain. Like it didn't click in my brain. And then, I had a psychiatric nursing professor because I was in nursing school, and she got me to go to a couple different eating disorders places, but I couldn't get in. I
Mm.
couldn't get in because I wasn't suicidal enough.
Oh gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
They're like, how much are you supposed to weigh? Well, I'm 5'8". I'm like medium size. I should weigh 140 to 45 pounds. And I was a bulimic. That's exactly what I weighed. I knew all the answers, right? Do you want to kill yourself? Well, no, I don't want to kill myself. I want to live. That's why I'm here. you know, but I didn't have I wasn't severely underweight, and I didn't have, suicidal ideology, and, I knew all the
Mhm.
right answers. Of course, I knew what I was supposed to look like and to weigh like. I mean, every person who has an eating disorder, like, the right answers, right?
Mhm.
And you think that you're doing the right thing, but you don't. And I never could get into an inpatient eating disorder, which I'm glad in the end that I never did, because I got to go to a great outpatient one, which is where, my life totally radically changed, because I got to understand how to rebuild my brain. And that's the same thing that I still do today for people. Because if I hadn't figured out how to rebuild my brain, I would have been on this hamster wheel going nowhere forever. Because, psychology, counseling, medications, all those things weren't helping. So,
Yeah, but it's unfortunate, right? I mean,
yeah,
as you were talking, I was just thinking that mentality of I'm not sick enough because I don't look like I
yeah,
have an eating disorder. And like you kind of get that reinforced with, oh, we're not going to let you in because you don't meet. Well, I'm glad they got rid of the weight criteria. Thank goodness,
right.
right?
Yeah,
But for so many years, that was the deal, right? Like meeting
it
this weight
was. Yeah.
criteria. And like, I think that reinforced for people like, well, see, I'm not sick enough. I don't really have one.
Yeah, I don't, this isn't an issue
Oh,
anymore.
right.
I'm destroying myself for every single day, but this is not an issue. I'm running at 2 a.m. in the morning for 5 miles because I want to make sure I get in my run for the day. I mean, that's not destructive at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's hard enough. I don't know about you, but I work with people, and a lot of times family members don't think that they really have an illness because
Hmm.
first of all, they're confusing, but then when it's validated by, well, we're not going to let you into this treatment program. It's like, well,
Yeah.
see, you're not really sick. You don't
Yeah.
need help. Um,
Just get over it.
yeah. You just
Yeah.
need to eat, you
Yeah,
just need to
just
stop
eat.
doing
Just
this,
eat. You'll
right?
be fine. You look great. Just eat and move on. And
Or
it's
yeah.
so much deeper than that. There's so much spiritual stuff going on. There's so much emotional stuff going on. And there's so much physical stuff. The depletion of nutrients in the body is so vast when somebody has any type of addiction, but in particular, an eating disorder. You have to eat in order to stay nourished. You have to eat
Mhm.
the right kinds of food in order for your brain. You can't eat things that your body is sensitive to. You have to build up the brain in order to function. And so if somebody's not functioning well, if they're anxious, they're depressed, they've got all these challenges, it's because
Mhm.
they're depleted physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So we've got to build all three of those things back up. Like you can't
Exactly.
just say to someone, well, get over it, because you can't get over a nutrient deficiency unless you fix it. You can't
Exactly.
get over something unless you address the issue that's really, the underlying issue going on for that person.
And I think to your point, it's very confusing too when someone's in a larger body, they think, well, they must not be malnourished, right? It's,
Right.
and that's such a lie, right? We know there's
Such a
atypical
lie.
anorexia, right? People in
Yeah.
larger bodies have every symptom of anorexia nervosa, right? They're
Yep.
starving themselves, they're doing all the behaviors, but they just happen to be in a larger body. That's
Yeah.
confusing for people. Or,
It is.
if somebody's in a larger body and they have bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder, or someone's
Mhm.
in a smaller body and they're binging, right? That's
Yeah.
confusing for people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just there's so many things, and you can have binge eating disorder and be very malnourished.
Hmm.
To your point, not getting the right types of nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so thinking,
I
how's
didn't
that
look
possible?
malnourished. I looked normal. You wouldn't look at me and say, hey, she has an eating disorder. But I was
Mhm.
binging and purging 6 to 12 times a day, you know?
Mhm.
So I had a problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, absolutely. That's why I say you can't look at anyone and know their state of health or if they have an eating disorder.
Right.
It's confusing. And I think one of the worst things is when people have binge eating disorder, they get told a lot, well, you just need to stop eating so much. You're
Right. You
lazy or you're
lack
not trying hard enough.
self-control. Hmm.
Yeah. And it's really hard for people to take in that they have an illness. It's like, I don't have enough willpower. I
Hmm.
just need to stop doing this. And after a binge, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of like
Oh,
self-criticism, a lot of
yeah.
beating of, I don't want to do this again. Why do I keep doing this? And there's something
Yep.
wrong with me. I got to try harder. I got to find the right diet.
Yeah.
No, it's an illness. And that's so hard, I think, for most people to take in.
Yeah. Yeah. Because those of you out there who are really relating with what Dr. Christina is saying right there, that, when you're binging and you don't feel like you have control over, all of a sudden you're like, I just ate that whole bag of chips, or I just ate a dozen donuts, or I stole food because I didn't have money to pay for it. And I was so hungry. Like I would go through the grocery store and I'd eat a dozen donuts while I shopped. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous, the things that you do. I never planned to do that, right? I don't know. It just happened. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it- your brain is depleted. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
fix that. you have to change your habits. That's why it's really important to see a counselor or therapist. I mean, you have to go deep into what's going on with your life spiritually. I mean, there's so many things that need to be dealt with. So it's not that you don't have enough willpower, you're a bad person.
Mhm.
You live in that shame and guilt. Like there is a way out. And that's why I'm so excited when you reached out and to do this podcast, because I'm like, there has to be so much more hope for people out there because it's really hard to
Mhm.
have this conversation, Christina. So hard. And
Mhm.
for women who still come in and they're in their 40s and they still have a bad relationship with food, they still have a bad relationship with their body, and they've been living like this forever. And I remember when my grandma died, she was anorexic probably from the time she was a teenager. She died when
Mhm.
she was 84 years old. She still was afraid to eat at 84.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I never wanted that to be me. Like she was actually motivating to me to like figure this out and to get over, because I didn't want to be, because, I saw her at 60, 70, 80,
Mhm.
still worried about what she weighed, and she got over 98 pounds. She was so scared, and, all these kind of things. And she thought she was fat when she was 120 pounds. And, and to be 84 years old and to still feel that way. I mean,
Mhm.
the words has to get out. People need to be set free.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's like torture, right? Like
Mhm.
to think you're struggling and it's about the food, but it's not about the food. It has nothing to
No.
do with the food. And people think it has everything to do with that. People might be confused when I'm saying that, but if you really think about it, it's like it's about something else. Like if you
Yeah,
weren't
it's
thinking
not the
about
root
food or
issue.
your body, it's like what else would you be thinking about?
Yeah.
It's a distractor from something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a coping mechanism.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think on the surface it doesn't look like that.
No, I think there's a lot of judgment there. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's a huge myth for sure. For sure. So when people come to you, where do you start with them?
Um, well, it depends where they're at. So, sometimes people are ready to go. They're just like, look, I have this, help me, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's, there's something called the stages of change, right? So if somebody's coming in and they're ready to work and they're
Mm-hmm.
ready to like get into treatment and like they're really accepting of like I have an eating disorder, like I really
Yeah.
want help. That's a whole different stage of like, let's go. Um, but if somebody's really scared and I can tell they're just like not ready to open it. It's a lot about trust building. It's a lot about education. It's a lot about like normalizing things
Yep.
and just kind of helping them understand like, okay, what is this relationship with food that you have?
Yeah.
So again, I think it just really depends where somebody's at. I
Mm-hmm.
think it can be really easy for people to like jump ship
Yeah.
initially because you're hitting on stuff that's like they've been hiding. You're
Yeah.
only as sick as your secrets. Like I don't just delve in and like, hey, divulge everything, right? I think you
Right,
have
right.
to build a level of trust because I remember that myself. Like I lied to my therapist for the longest
Oh
time,
my
right?
goodness,
Like,
yes. Yeah.
it's embarrassing. I was even lying to
Yeah.
myself, right?
Yeah, and I made
Um,
up really good stories that made my life sound way better than what it was.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it takes a lot to just understand that for yourself. Like once you divulge everything and you open up and you let it out, that's what's the freeing part.
Yep.
It just releases so much. And I think that's really hard for people to understand. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like it's a release. It's just a freedom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. What would you say to somebody who's struggling right now?
Gosh, the best gift you can give yourself is to go find help.
Yeah.
I know that's what I don't like about this. Like in the medical field, there's insurance that covers things. I really wish we would revamp our insurance and the coverage for mental health treatment and
Yeah.
destigmatize that. Like
Yeah.
I still think there's been a lot of forward progress, but I still think there's the stigma out there that if you go in to see someone for treatment in the mental health field, like you're quote unquote crazy or something's wrong
Mhm.
with you, or I don't really need this.
Right.
Right. It's an extra or it's too expensive. I hate that. I really do.
Hmm.
Because I think it's a huge barrier to treatment. People that
Yeah.
don't have insurance or don't feel like it's necessary or it's a stigma. But I just have to say, it's this is the deadliest mental health illness. It does kill people. It
Yeah.
hits you on the physical health level and the mental health level.
Yep.
It impacts so many areas of your life. If the sooner you get treatment, the better.
Yep.
The longer you go on, the more health problems you're going to have, the more it's going to impact relationships in your life, like all sorts of areas in your life. It's really imperative just to get help and get relief. And you
Yeah.
don't really realize till you get it, like the impact it has on you. So
Oh,
just
so
really
true.
encourage you to seek help.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can they find you?
So I have a private practice of virtual, it's at freedomtowellness.com. And I also have a podcast at behindthebitepodcast.com.
Which is really good, by the way. So I would encourage all my listeners to listen to Behind the Bite podcast along with Take Back My Brain. You will get a lot of valuable information out of both our podcasts for sure. So this has been an amazing conversation. Amazing conversation. I think it's one that needs to continue. So I do appreciate your dedication to, this area of eating disorder, disordered eating, and, body image and those types of things, because it's key to finding freedom in life for sure. So thank you, Dr. Christina, for being here today. This has been truly a blessing to myself and my audience. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And all the work you're doing is fantastic. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. All of Dr. Christina's information will be in the show notes. So make sure you check all that out, her podcast, her website, and D all the above. So I've got some good information on her that you can check out below. So I encourage all you to do that. And I will see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.